He was just a chauffeur, a man behind the wheel, quiet, unseen. For over 3 decades, he drove one of the richest men in America. No one paid much attention, not the press, not the billionaire's family, not even the billionaire himself, or so they thought. But when the old man died, everything changed. Because in the pages of his will was a name no one expected, and a story no one saw coming. Welcome to the quiet truth, where quiet people carry loud legacies. If stories like this move you, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Now, let's begin. His name was James Keller, 63 years old. Gray hair, neat mustache, posture straight as a soldier. He wore black suits, polished shoes, and always carried a soft, worn handkerchief in his breast pocket, a habit from another time. For 37 years, he had driven Elliot Hartman, one of the richest men in the country. A tech visionary, a recluse, a billionaire who rarely smiled and never spoke more than he had to. People in the household called him the ghost in the garage. James would arrive before dawn, park in the same spot, check the oil, dust the dashboard, then wait. Sometimes for hours. He didn't mind. That was the job. He'd driven Elliot through storms, protests, award galas, even once through a backroad detour to avoid paparazzi during a scandal. He never asked questions. He never spoke unless spoken to. He always took the long route home when Elliot looked tired and kept mints in the glove compartment, because Elliot liked the cinnamon kind. But despite all that, they barely ever talked. No birthdays shared, no Christmas cards exchanged, no family dinners, not even eye contact, most days. James was just the driver, and he was fine with that. Until the day Elliot Hartman died. Suddenly. Quietly. And James received a phone call from a lawyer requesting his presence at the reading of the will. The room was quiet, too quiet for the kind of family Elliot Hartman left behind. Mahogany walls, velvet chairs, a long oak table polished to a mirror shine. At the head sat Mason Riley, Elliot's longtime personal attorney. Thin, calm, unreadable behind silver-rimmed glasses. To his left, Clara Hartman, Elliot's only living relative. Grandniece, Ivy League graduate, sharp as glass and just as cold. To his right, executives, accountants, a few longtime staff. And near the end of the table, almost as an afterthought, sat James Keller, still in his black suit, still sitting straight. He hadn't said a word since entering, and no one had spoken to him. Mason opened a thick leather folder. This is the last will and testament of Elliot Warren Hartman Girash. He began, voice slow, deliberate. Dated 7 months before his passing. It has been verified and sealed under federal observance. Clara's fingers tapped impatiently on the table. Someone cleared their throat. To Clara Hartman, Mason read, I leave the Palm Springs property, the Monet in the upstairs gallery, and full administrative access to the Hartman Family Trust, under review for annual renewal. Clara exhaled, smug. But Mason continued. To my house staff, those who've stayed with me through the decades, I leave gratuity bonuses to be divided according to tenure. They were loyal. More loyal than most blood. James blinked. That was more than he expected. But Mason wasn't done. He flipped to a sealed envelope. One marked, to be opened in the presence of Mr. James Keller only. The room stiffened. Clara frowned. Mason looked up. The remainder of the will, including primary estate control, is detailed in this letter. What? Clara said finally. You're joking. Mason didn't blink. Mr. Keller, he said gently. Would you follow me to the study, please? James stood slowly. His shoes echoed against the marble. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, all eyes were on the driver. The door clicked shut behind them. The study was smaller than James remembered. Cozy. Diamond Soy's bookshelves from floor to ceiling. A single lamp glowed amber on the desk. Mason gestured for James to sit. He didn't. Instead, James stood with his hands folded behind his back, like he always had, when waiting beside the car. Mason unsealed the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter, handwritten on thick cream paper. He unfolded it, cleared his throat. James, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. I hope it wasn't sudden, but knowing me, it probably was. James lowered his eyes. I've never been good at saying things, or noticing people the way they deserve. You were there, always. Through marriages, mistakes, my failures, my silence. Mason paused, then continued. You saw the man before the fortune, and you stayed long after everyone else left. James's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. So, here's the truth. Everything that matters, the personal estate, the patents, the foundation, it's yours now. Not because you earned it with loyalty, but because you reminded me what it meant to be human. I was raised to believe money made men. You showed me restraint makes men. Use it how you want. Keep it. Burn it. Give it away. Just don't disappear like I did. You were never just the driver. You were the only person I trusted to carry the weight of who I really was. Mason folded the letter slowly. The room fell silent again. James didn't move. After nearly a minute, he spoke, voice low, steady. I never asked for this. He knew that, Mason replied. That's exactly why he gave it to you. The news traveled fast, faster than anyone expected. By the time James stepped out of the study, Clara was already pacing the hallway. What did he leave you? She demanded. The car? A pension? A letter full of guilt? James said nothing. Mason, standing behind him, answered for him. The house, the foundation, the remainder of the estate, everything outside the trust. Clara blinked, then laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You mean the driver inherits the legacy? That's absurd. It was Elliot's decision, Mason said calmly. It's final. And legal. Clara's face tightened. He's not family. Mason glanced at James, then replied, maybe not by blood. But Elliot didn't leave anything to blood, did he? That afternoon, the mansion on Westbourne Lane no longer belonged to Clara, or the Hartman name. It was James's now. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even go inside. He sat in the back of the same black sedan he'd driven for 30 years, parked in the same spot beneath the carport, hands resting on his knees, eyes unfocused. The staff, what was left of them, whispered. A few were kind, most were confused. 1 or 2 were bitter. James never said a word. That night he slept in the garage, not in the mansion, not yet. The next morning, James walked the property, not as its owner, not as a guest, but as a man searching for ghosts. Every room held memories, not his, but Elliot's. And in a strange way, his own. He walked past the grand piano Elliot never played, past the study he rarely entered, down the back hallway few ever saw, and stopped at a door, the archive room. He had only been inside once, nearly 20 years ago. With trembling fingers, he turned the brass knob. Dust clung to everything. Books, journals, binders, boxes stacked with yellowing papers. In the far corner sat a trunk. He opened it. Inside were photos, some old, some older. One photo made him freeze. It was from 1987. A young James standing beside a rusted sedan. Elliot, before the suits and the silence, grinning beside him. He remembered that day. The rain. The broken tire. How he had picked up a stranger stranded on the side of the road, only to discover, weeks later, that stranger would become his employer. But there were other photos. Ones he didn't remember. James, driving Elliot's first investor to a secret meeting. James, holding a wrapped gift beside Elliot's first wife. James, waiting in the shadows as security escorted away a man in cuffs. He hadn't realized how many moments he'd been part of, without ever being in the spotlight. And at the bottom of the trunk, a notebook. Elliot's handwriting, page after page. James doesn't speak much, but he notices everything. When the board betrayed me, he was the only one who stayed. He turned around on the freeway when he saw I was crying in the mirror. He never said a word, just drove slower. He doesn't know I see him as the only person who ever really knew me. James closed the notebook. His hands shook, not from grief, but from a strange kind of recognition. Not of the man Elliot was, but of the man Elliot saw in him. Mason returned 2 days later. He didn't knock. James was already sitting by the window, a cup of black coffee in hand, untouched, long since cold. "There's more," Mason said quietly. "One last thing. From Elliot." James turned, didn't respond. Mason reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, sealed envelope, unmarked except for 2 words in faded pen. "Deliver this." "To who?" James asked. Mason sat down across from him. He didn't say, not directly, but he left a file, an address, some context. "Where is it?" "Montana. A town called Shelburne." James's brow furrowed. "That's a long way." Mason nodded. "He said it was important, that you were the only one who would understand why, once you got there." James leaned back slowly. For decades, Elliot Hartman had barely spoken more than a sentence to him in a day. Now, in death, he was asking for a journey. "You don't have to go," Mason said gently. "Legally, you fulfilled everything." James didn't answer. He looked down at the envelope in his hands. The weight of it. The finality of it. He thought about the photos, the notebook, the years. And then he stood. "When do I leave?" The train left just after sunrise. James sat by the window, suit pressed, shoes polished, envelope in his inner coat pocket. He didn't bring much, just a small bag, the letter, and the notebook Elliot had left behind. Outside, the scenery changed slowly. City to suburb, suburb to forest, then the vast open quiet of the American Northwest. He hadn't traveled like this in years. No itinerary, no schedule, no one waiting on the other end, or so he thought. He reread the address Mason had given him. It led to a single name. Marion Green. There was no other note, no explanation, but the name felt familiar, buried in a place memory rarely visits. He arrived in Shelburne late in the afternoon. The town was small. One diner, one gas station, a few clapboard houses huddled against the foothills. Quiet in a way that almost felt sacred. He asked for directions. A teenage girl at the diner pointed him toward a narrow gravel road. At the end stood a house. Old, weathered, but cared for. He knocked. A woman in her late 50s answered. Short hair, soft lines on her face, eyes that froze the moment they saw him. "You're James?" He nodded. "You knew Elliot?" He nodded in Suran. She looked down at the envelope in his hand, and her shoulders sank. He finally did it. Inside, they sat in silence for a moment. James looked around. Pictures on the mantel. A young boy. A younger woman. Then a photo of Elliot. much younger, holding a baby. He stared. "That's our son," she said softly. "Mine and Elliot's." James didn't speak. "He left," she said, "when the pressure got too big, when the company took over. Said we'd ruin everything if we stayed. So I raised the boy alone. And Elliot disappeared." James finally handed her the envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a trust deed, a letter, and a photo. Torn at the corner, but whole in the heart. Tears welled in her eyes. He remembered. James didn't ask what the letter said. He didn't need to. He had delivered more than a message. He had delivered the last piece of a man who, in silence, tried to make peace with the noise he left behind. James stayed in Shelburne one more night. He didn't talk much. He didn't ask for more than Marion was willing to share. He simply sat on the porch, beneath a sky unpolluted by city lights, and listened. To the quiet, to the crickets, to the weightlifting, slowly, from someone else's life. Before leaving, Marion walked him to the edge of the property. "I didn't expect him to come back," she said, "but I think you were the only way he knew how." James nodded once. "He said you drove him through everything. Turns out you drove him home too." She handed him a photo, a copy of the one she found in the letter. "You should keep this," she said. "You were in it too." James didn't look at it until he boarded the train. It was old, a little grainy, but clear enough. There, beside a younger Elliot and Marion, was James, in the background, half-cropped, holding the keys, looking forward, just like always. Back in the city, things had changed. The media wanted a story. The board wanted explanations. Clara had gone silent, but James didn't answer any of them. Instead, he donated half of the Hartman estate to an educational fund. In the name of a child the world never knew. The mansion remained, but he never moved in. He returned to the garage apartment, still rose early, still polished his shoes, still kept cinnamon mints in the glove box, but the car stayed parked. Because some journeys aren't meant to be repeated. They're meant to be remembered. If this story moved you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe to The Quiet Truth. Because sometimes the quietest people leave behind the loudest echoes.